Marcus Chun stood at the edge of the Galactic Hunters Guild registration platform, watching aliens of every shape and size laugh at his application form. The four-armed Zephyrian clerk held his paperwork between two claws like it was contaminated waste. Human, the clerk said, his translator making the word sound like an insult. You want to register as a Class A hunter. This must be some kind of joke. The waiting area fell silent. A massive Krothack warrior, standing nearly 3 meters tall with skin like living stone, turned to stare. His tusks gleamed as he smiled. Did that little pink thing just say it wants to hunt? What's next? Maybe the Velvari will claim they can fight wars. The Velvari he mentioned were small, furry creatures known throughout the galaxy for being excellent accountants and terrible at everything involving physical danger. The comparison was meant to be crushing. Around the platform, dozens of alien hunters began laughing. The sound echoed through the metal corridors of Nexus Station, the galaxy's largest trading hub. Marcus kept his face blank. He had expected this reaction. Humans had been part of the galactic community for only 12 years. In that time, they had gained a reputation for being decent engineers, adequate traders, and surprisingly good diplomats. But hunters? The idea was ridiculous to most aliens. I'm serious, Marcus said calmly. I want to register. The Zephyrian clerk's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. Human, do you understand what hunters do? We track and capture the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. We face beasts that can tear through military-grade armor. We hunt in environments that would kill most species in minutes. I understand. Your species is weak, a voice called from the crowd. Marcus turned to see a Hectarian female approaching. She moved like liquid mercury, her silver skin reflecting the station's lights. Humans have no natural weapons, no claws, no venom, no telepathic abilities. You are prey animals, not predators. More laughter rippled through the crowd. Marcus noticed several aliens recording the conversation with their personal devices. This would probably end up on the Galactic Information Network within hours. Another amusing story about naive humans who didn't know their place. Your homeworld is a garden planet, the Krothack warrior added. Moderate climate, abundant food, no apex predators that could challenge even a child of my species. What could such a soft world possibly teach you about hunting? Marcus smiled for the first time since entering the guild hall. Would you like me to show you? The Krothack's laugh was like rocks grinding together. Show me? Here? Little human, this is a space station. There is nothing to hunt except maintenance bots. Actually, Marcus said, pulling out his personal tablet, I've been studying the guild's records. 3 Class A hunting contracts are currently open with no takers. 3 creatures that have killed or escaped every hunter sent after them. The contracts have been open for months because no one can complete them. The Hectarian's silver face shifted into what might have been surprise. You cannot be serious. Those contracts exist because the creatures are essentially impossible to capture alive. The guild keeps them posted as warnings, not actual assignments. The Voidstalker of Kepler, 442b, Marcus read from his tablet. A creature that exists partially outside normal space-time, invisible to most detection equipment, has killed 17 hunters and escaped from containment 6 times. Current bounty, 2.3 million galactic credits. Murmurs went through the crowd. Even experienced hunters spoke of the Voidstalker in whispers. The quantum beast of the Helix Nebula, Marcus continued. A creature that exists in multiple dimensional states simultaneously, can phase through any physical barrier, has driven 12 hunters insane just by looking at them. Bounty, 3.1 million credits. Stop, the Zephyrian clerk said nervously. You don't understand what you're reading. Those aren't real contracts. They're theoretical exercises. And the Nightmare Weaver of Proximus 7, Marcus finished. A creature that feeds on fear and can create perfect hallucinations in the minds of its prey. Has never been successfully tracked because it makes hunters see whatever it wants them to see. Bounty, 4.2 million credits. The laughter had died completely. Several aliens were backing away from Marcus like he had announced he was carrying a plague. "You want to hunt these creatures?" the Hectarian asked. "You would die within minutes of encountering any of them. If you were lucky." "Maybe," Marcus admitted, "but I want to try." According to guild regulations, any registered member can accept any posted contract, even the theoretical ones. The Zephyrian clerk's claws clicked nervously against his desk. "The guild would not be responsible for your death. Or worse. Some fates are much worse than death when dealing with creatures like these. I understand the risks. Your species would blame us," the Crothack warriors said. "When you fail and die horribly, other humans will say we should have stopped you. They will claim we sent you to your death deliberately." Marcus shook his head. "I'm here as an individual, not a representative of my species. I take full responsibility for my choices." The crowd had grown larger. Word was spreading through the station that a human was actually trying to register for the most dangerous hunting contracts in galactic history. Some aliens were taking bets on how long Marcus would survive. "Very well," the Zephyrian clerk said finally. "But you must pass the standard aptitude test first. Physical conditioning, weapons proficiency, survival skills, and creature knowledge. Most candidates spend years preparing for these tests." "I'm ready now." More incredulous stares. The aptitude tests were legendary for their difficulty. They were designed to weed out unsuitable candidates before they got themselves and their teammates killed in the field. "The physical test alone will eliminate you," the Hectarian said. "You will need to demonstrate the ability to survive in 10 different hostile environments for at least 4 hours each. Environments that would kill unprotected humans in minutes." "What equipment am I allowed?" "Standard hunter gear only. No species-specific modifications or accommodations." Marcus nodded. "When do we start?" The Crothack warrior stepped forward. His massive form cast a shadow over Marcus. "Human, I will make you an offer. Walk away now, and I will speak well of your courage to others. Stay, and you will die in the most horrible ways imaginable. These creatures you want to hunt? They are not animals. They are living nightmares that have evolved to kill hunters specifically." "Thanks for the warning," Marcus said. "But I'm staying." The Zephyrian clerk sighed deeply. "Very well. The first test begins in 1 hour. Environmental survival simulation. You will be placed in a recreation of the burning plains of Zirian Prime. Surface temperature of 180 degrees Celsius, poisonous atmosphere, and gravity 3 times your home planet's normal level. Most species require specialized equipment just to survive there for minutes." "Sounds fun. If you somehow survive that, the second environment will be the ice caverns of Hoth Delta. Temperature of minus 200 degrees Celsius, near zero visibility, and atmospheric pressure that will crush most creatures. The third will be the acid swamps of Zeloth, where the very air will dissolve unprotected flesh." Marcus was already walking toward the testing chambers. "Lead the way." The crowd followed, now genuinely curious rather than just amused. No one expected the human to pass even the first test, but they wanted to see exactly how he would fail. The testing chamber was a massive sphere that could recreate any environment in the galaxy. As Marcus suited up in standard hunter gear, he could hear aliens placing bets through the observation windows. The odds were heavily against him surviving even 30 minutes. "Last chance to reconsider," the Zephyrian clerk called through the communication system. "The guild has a strict policy against suicide attempts." Marcus checked his equipment one final time. Standard atmosphere recycler, basic temperature regulation suit, emergency beacon, and a standard issue hunting rifle that could fire various types of energy bolts. Nothing specialized, nothing that would give him an unfair advantage over other species. "I'm ready." The chamber began to shift around him. The metal walls became cracked stone. The air shimmered with heat as the temperature climbed rapidly. Within minutes, Marcus was standing on the recreated surface of Zirian Prime, one of the most hostile worlds in known space. The gravity hit him like a sledgehammer. He had prepared for this, spending months training under increased gravity, but the simulation was perfect. Every step felt like he was carrying 2 other people on his back. His bones creaked under the pressure. The heat was worse. Even with the regulation suit, He could feel sweat beginning to pour down his face. The poisonous atmosphere made every breath a conscious effort to keep his recycler working properly. Through the observation windows, he could see aliens watching with expressions ranging from morbid curiosity to genuine concern. A few were already shaking their heads, certain he would collapse within minutes. Marcus began to walk. The key he had learned from studying human persistence hunting techniques was not to fight the environment, but to adapt to it. His ancestors had chased prey across the African savanna for hours at a time, running down creatures much faster and stronger than themselves through sheer endurance. He found a rhythm, slow, steady steps that conserved energy while keeping him moving, controlled breathing that maximized the efficiency of his recycler, mental techniques to manage the pain and discomfort without letting them distract him from his goal. 1 hour passed. Aliens pressed closer to the observation windows. The human was still moving, still conscious. This was already longer than many had expected. 2 hours. Marcus was sweating heavily, but his pace remained steady. He had figured out how to use the rocky terrain to his advantage, finding paths that required less energy while still covering the required distance. 3 hours. The betting had stopped. No one was laughing anymore. Several aliens were consulting their databases to confirm that this was actually a baseline human with no genetic modifications or cybernetic enhancements. How is this possible? The Hectarian whispered to the Crowdhack warrior. I don't know, the warrior replied. My species evolved on a high-gravity world with extreme temperatures. We should be better adapted to these conditions than any human. But look at him. Marcus was not just surviving. He was solving problems. When his suit's cooling system began to show stress from the heat, he found mineral deposits that provided some shade and used them strategically. When the gravity made walking too difficult, he developed a modified crawling technique that distributed his weight more efficiently. For hours. 5. 6. This is impossible, someone in the crowd muttered. Humans are not built for this. They're barely built for their own planet. But Marcus kept moving, and as he moved, something else was happening. The other aliens in the testing area were beginning to see him differently. This wasn't luck or some kind of trick. This was systematic adaptation under impossible conditions. 8 hours passed. The test was supposed to last only 4 hours for baseline survival. Marcus had doubled that. The Zephyrian clerk was frantically consulting guild regulations to see if there was an upper time limit. Enough, the clerk announced over the communication system. You have passed the first environment test. Marcus stopped walking and looked up at the observation windows. He was exhausted, covered in sweat, and probably mildly dehydrated. But he was smiling. Ready for the ice caves, he called out. The crowd stared in stunned silence as the chamber began to shift again. The heat drained away, replaced by bone-numbing cold. The rocky plains became a maze of ice caverns where every breath created clouds of vapor, and the slightest misstep could mean falling into a crevasse. Marcus adjusted his equipment for the new environment and began walking again. By the time he completed all 10 environmental tests, word had spread throughout Nexus Station. Crowds of aliens gathered outside the testing chambers, watching in amazement as a human did something that should have been physically impossible. Marcus emerged from the final test chamber after 42 hours of continuous environmental survival trials. He was tired and hungry, but he was alive and alert. More importantly, he had adapted to each environment in ways that surprised even the guild examiners. The weapons proficiency test, the Zephyrian clerk said weakly. You still need to pass weapons proficiency. Let's do it. The weapons test was normally considered easier than environmental survival, since it only tested accuracy and reaction time rather than endurance. The testing range had targets that moved in 3 dimensions, simulating real hunting conditions. Marcus picked up the standard hunting rifle and examined it. He had never used this exact model before, but the principles were the same as human firearms. Point, aim, fire. Compensate for gravity, air resistance, and target movement. The first target appeared. a holographic recreation of a Zephyrian razorwing, one of the fastest flying predators in known space. It moved like liquid lightning, changing direction randomly every few seconds. Marcus tracked it for 3 seconds, learning its pattern. Then he fired. Direct hit. The second target was a Hectarian void snake, a creature that could phase in and out of visible reality. It appeared for only milliseconds at a time in completely random locations. Marcus waited. Humans were persistent hunters, but they were also ambush predators when necessary. He watched for the pattern, the tiny tells that would indicate where the snake would appear next. Another direct hit. Target after target appeared. Creatures that flew, crawled, phased, teleported, and moved in ways that violated physics. Marcus hit them all. Ow! The Hectarian from earlier asked. She had stayed to watch the entire testing process. Your species has no natural weapons. Your reflexes are not exceptionally fast. How are you doing this? Marcus set down the rifle and stretched his shoulders. Pattern recognition. Patience. Humans are really good at both. But these creatures move in ways that should be impossible to predict. Nothing is impossible to predict if you watch long enough. Everything has patterns, even chaos. Humans evolved to find those patterns. The creature knowledge test was next. Marcus had to identify hundreds of different predatory species and explain their hunting behaviors, weaknesses, and capture methods. This was normally the hardest test for new hunters, requiring years of study. Marcus had been studying for only 6 months, but he had done something most aliens didn't think to do. Instead of just memorizing facts about each creature, he had looked for the underlying principles. How did energy-based predators differ from physical ones? What were the common weaknesses of creatures that could manipulate reality? He passed with a perfect score. The final test was survival skills. Marcus had to demonstrate the ability to track prey, set traps, navigate in unfamiliar territory, and survive without equipment for extended periods. This was what he had been training for his entire life without knowing it. Human survival skills were different from those of other species. Humans didn't rely on natural weapons or abilities. They used tools, intelligence, and most importantly, they never gave up. Marcus built shelters from debris, created water purification systems from spare parts, and tracked holographic prey through environments designed to confuse and disorient hunters. When his equipment failed, he improvised. When the environment changed, he adapted. When the testing was complete, the guild hall was packed with observers. Aliens who had come to watch a human fail spectacularly were now witnessing something unprecedented. I hereby certify Marcus Chun as a Class A hunter of the Galactic Hunters Guild, the Zephyrian clerk announced. All tests passed with exceptional scores. The crowd erupted. Some aliens cheered. Others argued that the tests must have been rigged somehow. But the data was clear. A human had just passed the most difficult hunter certification in galactic history. Marcus walked back to the contract desk. I'd like to accept the Void Stalker contract. The Void Stalker? The clerk's voice cracked. You want to start with the creature that has killed 17 experienced hunters? According to my research, it's actually the easiest of the 3 impossible contracts. Easiest, the Hectarian had approached again. Marcus Chun, I've studied the Void Stalker for decades. It exists partially outside our reality. It cannot be seen, heard, or detected by conventional means. How do you propose to hunt something that doesn't fully exist in our dimension? Marcus smiled. The same way humans hunted everything else. Patience, persistence, and pattern recognition. He turned to address the crowd that had gathered around him. You're all thinking about this wrong. You're trying to hunt these creatures like they're just bigger, more dangerous versions of normal prey. But they're not normal. They're apex predators that have evolved specifically to kill hunters. Exactly, the Crowhack warriors said. That's why they're impossible to catch. No, that's why they can be caught. Don't you see? They've specialized. They've adapted to hunt hunters. But humans aren't hunters the way you understand hunting. Marcus pulled up a holographic display of his homeworld. Earth has no apex predators that could challenge a galactic hunter. But it has something much more dangerous. It has humans. We didn't evolve to be the strongest or fastest or most heavily armed. We evolved to be the most persistent. The crowd listened in rapt silence. Every other species in the galaxy became apex predators by being better than their prey at something specific. Faster, stronger, more venomous, whatever. Humans became apex predators by being worse at everything except one thing. We never give up. Marcus gestured to the contract display. The Void Stalker kills hunters because it's adapted to hunt hunters. But I'm not going to hunt it like a hunter. I'm going to hunt it like a human. And what does that mean? The Hectarian asked. It means I'm going to follow it until it gets tired of running. Then I'm going to follow it some more. And when it tries to kill me, I'm going to survive that and keep following it. Sooner or later, it's going to make a mistake. And when it does, I'll be there. Marcus signed the contract forms and headed toward the docking bay where his ship was waiting. Behind him, the crowd of aliens continued to argue about whether what they had just witnessed was possible. But Marcus wasn't listening to them anymore. He was thinking about the Void Stalker, studying everything known about its behavior and habitat. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, the deadliest creature in the galaxy was waiting. It had no idea that the galaxy's most persistent predator was coming for it. Marcus Chin's ship, the Persistence, dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. The star burned cold and blue in the distance, casting harsh shadows across the hull as he began his approach to the fourth planet. Kepler 442b looked like a marble made of ash and silver from orbit. No atmosphere to speak of, no magnetic field, and temperatures that swung from 300 degrees Celsius on the day side to minus 180 on the night side. It was exactly the kind of world where something like the Void Stalker would evolve. Marcus reviewed the mission files one more time as his ship automatically adjusted course for the research station where the creature had last been spotted. 17 dead hunters. All of them experienced professionals with advanced equipment and species-specific advantages that should have made them nearly impossible to kill. The first had been a Zephyrian pack hunter with 4 arms, each equipped with weapons designed specifically for tracking interdimensional creatures. They found him 3 days later, apparently scared to death. No wounds, no signs of struggle, just a look of absolute terror frozen on his face. The second hunter was a Croat-hack warrior, nearly invulnerable to physical attack, and equipped with military-grade sensory enhancement. They found pieces of his armor scattered across 12 kilometers of surface terrain. The pieces that had been inside the armor were never recovered. The list went on. Each hunter had tried a different approach. Electronic detection, psionic tracking, quantum sensors, reality anchors, dimensional barriers. Nothing had worked. The creature had killed them all, usually in ways that made no sense according to known physics. Marcus's approach was going to be different. He wasn't bringing any specialized equipment. No advanced sensors, no reality manipulation devices, no weapons designed for interdimensional combat. Just basic gear, human intuition, and the one advantage no other species seemed to understand: time. The research station appeared on his sensors as he approached the planet. It had been abandoned for 6 months, ever since the last hunting expedition had failed catastrophically. The station's automated systems were still running, but no living being had set foot on the planet since then. Marcus docked his ship at the station and began his preparations. First, he studied every piece of data the station had collected about the Void Stalker. Not just the failed hunting attempts, but the creature's behavior patterns, its preferred hunting grounds, and, most importantly, its mistakes. Because it did make mistakes. Every creature did, even apex predators. The trick was being patient enough to wait for them. The Void Stalker existed partially outside normal space-time, which made it nearly impossible to track with conventional sensors. It could appear and disappear at will, phase through solid matter, and seem to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. But there were patterns in its behavior that the previous hunters had missed. It preferred hunting during the planet's long night cycles, when the temperature dropped below the freezing point of most known atmospheres. It avoided areas with high electromagnetic activity, which suggested its interdimensional abilities had limits. And, most tellingly, it had never been spotted more than 50 kilometers from the planet's equatorial canyon system. Marcus spent 3 days analyzing the data before he even left the research station. Other hunters would have considered this a waste of time. They would have been eager to begin the actual hunt, to use their superior reflexes and advanced equipment to track down their prey. But Marcus understood something they didn't. The hunt had already begun the moment he entered the system. The Void Stalker knew he was here. It was probably watching him right now, studying his behavior, learning his weaknesses. That was fine. He was learning about it too. On the 4th day, Marcus finally left the station. He didn't head for the creature's preferred hunting grounds. Instead, he set up camp in the foothills near the canyon system and began the most boring activity in the galaxy: waiting. He established a routine: check equipment, review sensor logs, eat a meal, walk the perimeter of his camp, sleep for exactly 6 hours, then start again. He did this for 7 days without seeing any sign of the creature. On the 8th day, his motion sensors detected something moving near his camp. The readings were inconsistent, flickering in and out of existence like a bad hologram. Marcus didn't react. He continued his routine as if nothing had happened. The creature was testing him, trying to gauge his response to its presence. Most hunters would have immediately gone on high alert, reaching for weapons, activating special equipment. The creature had learned to recognize these responses and use them against its prey. But Marcus just kept doing what he had been doing: walking his perimeter, checking his equipment, maintaining his camp. He acknowledged the sensor readings by making a note in his log, but otherwise treated the appearance of the galaxy's most dangerous predator as just another routine event. This seemed to confuse the creature. The sensor contacts became more frequent, but also more erratic. It was trying different approaches, looking for the response it expected from a hunter. Marcus gave it something completely different. He gave it boredom. On the 10th day, the creature made its first mistake. Marcus was eating his evening meal when his peripheral vision caught something that didn't belong. A shadow that fell the wrong way. A patch of starlight that bent slightly to the left. The Void Stalker was visible, just for a fraction of a second, but it was there. Marcus continued eating as if nothing had happened, but his mind was racing. The creature had let itself become partially anchored to normal space-time, probably while trying to get a better look at him. That was useful information. It meant the creature's interdimensional abilities weren't perfect. It had to make trade-offs between staying hidden and being able to interact with the physical world. Marcus began testing this theory. He started leaving small objects around his camp in specific arrangements: food packages, equipment pieces, spare parts. Things that would be tempting for a curious predator to investigate. The objects began disappearing, not all at once, and not in any obvious pattern. A food package here, a tool there, always items that seemed accidentally dropped or carelessly placed. But Marcus was tracking everything, and he could see the pattern forming. The creature was intelligent. It was trying to learn about him by examining his belongings. But intelligence was a double-edged sword. The smarter a predator was, the more predictable its behavior became. Marcus began leaving specific items in specific places. A portable scanner near his sleeping area. A weapon that appeared to have been set down hastily near the camp perimeter. Emergency rations that seemed to have spilled from a damaged container. Each item was equipped with microscopic tracking devices that couldn't be detected by interdimensional creatures, but could provide basic location data when the items moved. On the 15th day, Marcus had his first real contact with the Void Stalker. He was checking his equipment when the temperature around him suddenly dropped by 30 degrees. The air itself seemed to thicken, and shadows began moving independently of their sources. Marcus looked up to find himself staring at something that shouldn't have existed. The creature was beautiful in the way that natural disasters were beautiful. It looked like a cross between a great cat and a piece of living darkness, with form that seemed to shift and flow like liquid shadow. Its eyes were points of absolute void that seemed to pull light into themselves. It was studying him with the patient intensity of an apex predator trying to understand new prey. Marcus did something that had never occurred to any of the previous hunters. He sat down, not in surrender, not in fear, but in the universal gesture of a creature that was not going to run. He met the creature's void-dark eyes and waited. The Void Stalker had evolved to hunt hunters. It understood pursuit, combat, fear, aggression. It had learned to counter all of these responses. But it didn't understand patience. For 20 minutes, human and creature stared at each other across the alien landscape. Marcus could feel the weight of the thing's attention, a pressure that seemed to push against the inside of his skull. This was how it had driven previous hunters insane, by forcing them to experience its alien consciousness. Marcus treated it like a headache and continued sitting. Finally, the creature made a sound that might have been confusion or frustration. It flickered out of visible existence, but Marcus could still feel its presence nearby. It was trying to understand what he was. That night, the real games began. Marcus woke to find his camp completely rearranged. Equipment had been moved, his sleeping bag had been dragged 50 meters away, and someone had arranged his spare ammunition in a complex geometric pattern that hurt to look at directly. Most hunters would have seen this as an attack, a psychological warfare tactic designed to create fear and confusion. Marcus saw it as communication. The creature was trying to tell him something. It was demonstrating its power, showing that it could manipulate the physical world at will. But it was also showing restraint. It could have simply killed him while he slept, but it hadn't. Marcus rearranged everything back to its original position and left a simple response. He took a stick and drew a circle in the dust, then sat in the center of it. The message was clear: I'm not going anywhere. The next morning, he found that the creature had drawn its own symbol in response. A complex spiral pattern that seemed to twist through dimensions that Marcus couldn't quite see. When he tried to study it directly, it gave him a headache. But he understood the meaning. The creature was saying, "Neither am I." What followed was the strangest game of cat and mouse in galactic history. Neither predator nor prey, human and Void Stalker began a complex dance of approach and withdrawal that lasted for weeks. The creature would appear at the edge of Marcus's vision, just visible enough to be seen but never clear enough to be targeted. It would rearrange his equipment in increasingly elaborate patterns, each one seemingly designed to communicate something specific. Marcus responded by treating each encounter as a conversation rather than a confrontation. When the creature moved his tools, he would study the arrangement before putting them back. When it left strange symbols in the dust, he would copy them in his journal and try to understand their meaning. Slowly, a pattern emerged. The creature wasn't just hunting him. It was trying to understand him. This made sense from an evolutionary perspective. The Void Stalker had developed its abilities to hunt hunters specifically. It had learned to counter every hunting technique used by galactic species. But humans weren't hunting it in any way it recognized. Marcus was doing something completely alien to the creature's experience. He was treating it as an equal. On the 23rd day, Marcus made a breakthrough. He had been studying the creature's symbols when he realized they weren't just abstract patterns. They were maps. The spiral designs showed the canyon system from a four-dimensional perspective, including features that existed outside normal space-time. The geometric arrangements of his equipment corresponded to energy patterns that flowed through the planet's interdimensional substrate. The creature was showing him its world. Marcus began responding with his own maps. Simple drawings that showed the human understanding of three-dimensional space, the mathematical principles that govern normal matter, and, most importantly, the concept of time as a linear progression rather than a simultaneous multiplicity. The cultural exchange continued for another week. Each night, the creature would leave new symbols or arrangements. Each day, Marcus would study them and leave responses. Gradually, they developed a rudimentary form of communication. And gradually, Marcus began to understand the creature's true nature. The Void Stalker wasn't malevolent. It was territorial. It had evolved in the spaces between dimensions, where the normal laws of physics didn't apply. To a creature that existed in multiple realities simultaneously, the presence of three-dimensional beings was intensely uncomfortable, like a constant low-level pain. It killed hunters not out of malice, but in the same way that a human might swat a mosquito. The hunters were irritating intrusions into its territory, and the easiest way to deal with them was elimination. But Marcus wasn't intruding. He was communicating. For the first time in its existence, the Void Stalker was encountering a three-dimensional being that treated it as something other than a target to be captured or killed. On the 30th day, the creature made its second mistake. It got curious. Marcus had been deliberately inconsistent in his communications, leaving gaps in his mathematical descriptions and incomplete sections in his maps. The creature, being intelligent, began trying to fill in the missing pieces. To do this, it had to anchor itself more firmly in normal space-time. It had to think in 3 dimensions rather than 4, to limit its consciousness to a single timeline rather than experiencing all possible timelines simultaneously. The moment it did this, Marcus acted. He didn't attack. He didn't try to capture it with nets or energy fields or reality anchors. Instead, he did something that would have seemed insane to any other hunter in the galaxy. He offered it a trade. Marcus pulled out a small device he had been working on for the past week. It was essentially a 3-dimensional puzzle box, but one whose solution required thinking in 4 dimensions. Something that would be impossibly difficult for a human, but merely interesting for a creature that existed partially outside normal space-time. In exchange, he wanted the creature to help him understand how interdimensional movement worked. The Void Stalker studied the puzzle box for nearly an hour before accepting the trade. It began showing Marcus how space-time could be folded and twisted, how a being could exist in multiple locations simultaneously, how the barriers between dimensions were more like guidelines than absolute rules. And while was doing this, while was focused on teaching rather than hunting, Marcus learned something crucial about the creature's nature. It was lonely. The Void Stalker was the only member of its species anyone had ever encountered. It lived in the spaces between realities, never fully part of any world, never able to truly communicate with any other form of life. Until now, Marcus spent the next 3 days learning from the creature and teaching it in return. He showed it human mathematics, human art, human concepts of friendship and cooperation. The creature showed him the true structure of the universe, the hidden dimensions that folded through normal space, the pattern that connected all things across time and space. And on the 33rd day, Marcus made his proposal. Instead of capturing the Void Stalker, he wanted to offer it a job. The creature's confusion was almost palpable. Jobs were a 3-dimensional concept, involving cooperation between beings that existed in the same reality. But Marcus explained the idea carefully, using the mathematical language they had developed together. The galactic community had creatures that needed to be hunted, not killed, but tracked and captured for various reasons. Scientific study, relocation from endangered habitats, removal from areas where they posed a threat to civilian populations. Most of these creatures could be handled by conventional hunters, but some existed partially outside normal reality. Some could phase between dimensions or existed in quantum superposition states. These required specialized techniques that no normal hunter possessed. The Void Stalker, however, possessed all of these abilities naturally. Marcus proposed a partnership. The creature would help him track and capture the most dangerous interdimensional predators in the galaxy. In exchange, it would gain access to a vast network of worlds and realities, the opportunity to meet other unique beings, and most importantly, it would never be alone again. The negotiation took 2 more days. The creature had to understand concepts like employment, cooperation, and mutual benefit. Marcus had to understand the creature's needs for dimensional stability, territorial boundaries, and periodic returns to its native space-time. But eventually they reached an agreement. On the 35th day, Marcus sent a message to the Galactic Hunters Guild. Contract completed. The Void Stalker had been successfully captured. What he didn't mention was that the creature was standing right next to him when he sent the message, and that it found the whole situation highly amusing. When the guild ship arrived to pick them up, Marcus introduced his new partner. The crew's reaction was exactly what he had expected: terror, confusion, and incredulous disbelief that a human had somehow managed to tame one of the most dangerous creatures in known space. But the Void Stalker demonstrated its willingness to cooperate by helping to track down a pack of quantum wolves that had been terrorizing shipping lanes in the sector. The creatures were captured alive and relocated to an unpopulated system within 6 hours, a task that would have taken conventional hunters weeks to accomplish. Word spread quickly through the galactic networks. The human hunter who had somehow befriended the Void Stalker. The impossible partnership between a 3-dimensional persistence predator and a 4-dimensional apex hunter. By the time they reached Nexus Station, crowds of aliens were waiting to see them. Marcus and his new partner walked through the station like celebrities, drawing stares and whispered conversations wherever they went. At the guild hall, the same Zephyrian clerk who had processed Marcus's original application was waiting with a bounty payment and a new set of contracts. The quantum beast of the Helix Nebula. The clerk said, his voice carefully neutral. Are you interested in attempting that contract as well? Marcus looked at his partner. The Void Stalker's form flickered slightly, a sign that it found the suggestion amusing. We'll take it, Marcus said, but we're going to need a bigger ship. As they left the guild hall to make preparations for their next hunt, Marcus could hear the betting pools starting up again. This time, the odds weren't on whether the human would survive. They were on how quickly he would complete the impossible. The quantum beast had no idea what was coming for it. A human who never gave up, and a creature that existed in all dimensions simultaneously. It was the beginning of the most effective hunting partnership in galactic history. The Helix Nebula stretched across space like a giant cosmic eye, its swirling colors beautiful enough to inspire poets and deadly enough to kill most travelers who ventured too close. Marcus Chun stood on the bridge of his new ship, the Dimensional Drift, watching the nebula grow larger on the forward screens as they approached the hunting ground of the quantum beast. His partner floated beside him, the Void Stalker's form shifting through dimensions as it studied the nebula with senses that could perceive reality from multiple angles simultaneously. The creature had chosen the name Shadow for their partnership, though Marcus suspected the translation didn't quite capture the 4-dimensional concept it was actually expressing. 12 hunters, Marcus said, reading from the mission briefing. All of them driven insane just from looking at the creature directly. The few who survive can't describe what they saw. Most of them just keep repeating the same phrase over and over. What phrase? Shadow asked. Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once, a side effect of existing in multiple dimensions. Everything is true. Shadow's form rippled with what Marcus had learned to recognize as concern. That suggests the creature can manipulate quantum probability states. What mortals see as reality is actually just the most probable outcome of infinite possibilities. If something can show you all possibilities simultaneously, it would drive most minds insane, Marcus finished, because they'd be seeing every possible version of reality at the same time. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's engines. Marcus had learned a lot about interdimensional physics during their partnership, but the quantum beast was operating on a level that made even Shadow nervous. There's something else, Marcus continued. The creature doesn't just exist in quantum superposition. It can force other things into superposition as well. That's how it escapes. When hunters try to capture it, it makes their containment equipment exist in multiple states simultaneously until it becomes useless. A formidable opponent, Shadow observed. Most hunters think in terms of absolute states. Something either exists or it doesn't, is either here or there, is either alive or dead. This creature thinks in terms of probability clouds and quantum uncertainty. Marcus smiled. Good thing we're not most hunters. Their ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Helix Nebula's gravity well. The nebula was beautiful from a distance, but Up close, it was clear why it had taken 12 hunters' sanity. The very structure of space-time seemed unstable here, with stellar matter existing in impossible configurations and light behaving in ways that violated basic physics. Sensor readings are inconsistent, the ship's AI announced, unable to maintain stable detection of any large life forms in the nebula. All readings exist in quantum superposition. Of course they do, Marcus muttered. Shadow, can you make sense of this? His partner extended its consciousness into the nebula, perceiving the quantum fluctuations directly rather than relying on mechanical sensors. The entire nebula exists in multiple states simultaneously. The creature has made its territory into a reflection of its own nature. Can you navigate through it? Yes, but carefully. If we make the wrong choices about which quantum states to collapse into reality, we could end up scattered across several different universes. Marcus had complete faith in Shadow's abilities, but he also understood the risks they were taking. The quantum beast wasn't just dangerous because it could drive beings insane. It was dangerous because it could make them cease to exist in any meaningful sense. They began their approach slowly, with Shadow guiding them through the maze of quantum possibilities. The nebula was like a three-dimensional puzzle where every piece existed in multiple positions simultaneously, and choosing the wrong path would trap them in a reality that might not contain a way out. There, Shadow said suddenly. I can sense something large moving through the probability matrices. The creature is aware of our presence. How can you tell? The quantum states are shifting in response to observation. It knows it's being watched, and it's adjusting the local reality to make tracking it more difficult. Marcus studied the readings on his instruments, though most of them were showing impossible values. So it's playing games with us already. Not games. This is a defensive behavior. The creature is trying to make us give up and leave its territory. That's not going to happen. Marcus activated the ship's communication system and broadcast a message into the nebula. Quantum Beast, my name is Marcus Chun. I'm here to talk, not to fight. I know you can hear this across all probability states. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The ship's screens flickered through thousands of different displays simultaneously. The lights dimmed and brightened in impossible patterns. For a moment, Marcus could swear he saw multiple versions of himself standing in the same spot, each one slightly different. Then, everything returned to normal. It's curious about us, Shadow observed. That was not an attack. It was an attempt at communication. What did it say? It wanted to know why we're not afraid. Every other hunter who has entered its territory was already showing signs of psychological stress by this point. But you're treating this as a conversation rather than a confrontation. Marcus began broadcasting again. I've studied your previous encounters with hunters. I know you're not malevolent. You're just trying to protect your territory from intrusion. But I'm not here to capture you or harm you. I want to understand you. The ship shuddered as something passed through it without actually touching it. Marcus felt a strange sensation, as if he were simultaneously sitting in his chair and standing in a dozen other locations throughout the ship. It's scanning us, Shadow said, trying to understand our quantum signatures. It's never encountered beings like us before. What makes us different? You exist in only one quantum state, but you're not afraid of multiplicity. And I exist in multiple states naturally. Together, we represent something it hasn't seen before. A stable partnership between ordered and chaotic existence. The scanning sensation intensified. Marcus could feel the creature's attention like a physical weight, pressing against his consciousness from angles that shouldn't have existed. But instead of fighting it, he relaxed and let the creature examine him. This was the same technique he had used with Shadow. Instead of treating the encounter as a confrontation, he was treating it as a meeting between equals. Show it something, Marcus said to Shadow. Something that demonstrates we're not like the other hunters. Shadow's form expanded, flowing through dimensions in a complex pattern that made Marcus's eyes water to watch directly. The ship's instruments went haywire as local space-time twisted into impossible configurations. But instead of causing chaos, Shadow's display created a strange sense of harmony. The chaotic quantum fluctuations of the nebula began to synchronize with Shadow's dimensional movements, creating patterns of incredible beauty and complexity. The quantum beast responded. Reality exploded around them in a cascade of possible universes. Marcus saw versions of himself where he had never left Earth, where he had become a doctor instead of a hunter, where humanity had never developed space travel. He saw versions where Shadow was a creature of pure light instead of living darkness, where the quantum beast was a benevolent guardian instead of a territorial predator. But somehow, through all the chaos of infinite possibility, Marcus maintained his sense of self. He understood that what he was seeing wasn't real in the conventional sense. It was the creature's way of showing him the nature of quantum existence. Everything was true, because truth itself was just one possibility among infinite others. Incredible, Shadow whispered. It's showing us the full spectrum of quantum reality. This is how it experiences existence every moment. No wonder it drives people insane, Marcus said. How can anything make decisions when it can see all possible outcomes simultaneously? As if responding to his question, the cascade of realities began to focus and narrow. The infinite possibilities compressed down to a smaller set, then smaller still, until Marcus was seeing only a few dozen potential outcomes for their current situation. In some of them, the quantum beast killed them. In others, it ignored them completely. But in a significant percentage, something unexpected happened. They became friends. It's showing us the probability matrix for this encounter, Shadow realized. It's demonstrating that hostile outcomes are possible, but not inevitable. Marcus understood. The creature was giving them a choice. They could approach this as hunters seeking prey, in which case the outcome would likely be violent. Or they could approach it as beings seeking understanding, in which case something unprecedented might happen. We choose understanding. Marcus broadcast into the nebula. The probability matrix collapsed into a single timeline. The ship's instruments stabilized. The chaotic energy of the nebula calmed into gentle swirls of luminous gas. And the quantum beast revealed itself. It was beautiful in a way that defied description. The creature existed as a flowing pattern of pure quantum probability, sometimes appearing as a vast jellyfish made of light, sometimes as a geometric structure that folded through dimensions Marcus couldn't perceive directly. It was simultaneously massive and microscopic, ancient and newborn, singular and multiple. Most importantly, it was intelligent. Not just smart like Shadow, but possessing a form of consciousness that operated on quantum principles. It could think in probabilities rather than certainties, could consider all possible thoughts simultaneously rather than processing them sequentially. "How long have you been alone?" Marcus asked. The creature's response came not as words, but as an emotional concept transmitted directly into their minds. Loneliness was too simple a term for what it conveyed. It was the isolation of being the only conscious being capable of quantum thought, of existing in all possible realities while never being able to truly share any of them. The hunters who came before, Marcus continued. You weren't trying to hurt them, were you? You were trying to communicate. Again, the response was emotional rather than verbal. Frustration, sadness, the desperate attempt to make contact with beings who could only think in single-state reality, who went mad when exposed to the full spectrum of quantum existence. Shadow moved closer to the creature, its own multidimensional nature, allowing it to communicate more directly. What passed between them was too complex for Marcus to follow directly, but he could sense the joy and wonder as two beings who existed outside normal reality finally found each other. It wants to know how we found it, Shadow translated. Other hunters tracked its quantum signature or tried to predict its movement patterns. But we approached it like it was a person rather than a target. Because it is a person, Marcus said. Not human, not like any species we know, but definitely a person. Conscious, intelligent, capable of suffering and joy. The creature's response was a wave of gratitude, so intense it made Marcus's eyes water. It had been trying to convey its personhood to every hunter who approached it, but they had all been focused on capturing or killing it. None of them had considered that it might have its own thoughts and feelings. What followed was the strangest conversation in Marcus's experience. The quantum beast communicated primarily through probability matrices and quantum state modifications. It would show them different potential realities and let them choose which ones to explore. It showed them its origins. Born from the quantum fluctuations of the early universe, it had evolved consciousness in the spaces between possibilities. It was ancient beyond measure, but also eternally young because it experienced all possible timelines simultaneously. It showed them its loneliness, the desperate search across the galaxy for other beings capable of quantum thought, the joy and disappointment when it encountered hunters, beings complex enough to be interesting but trapped in single-state thinking. It showed them its hope, the possibility of connection, of friendship, of finally finding others who could understand its nature. There are others like you, Marcus realized, scattered across the galaxy, beings that exist in quantum superposition, in interdimensional space, in temporal loops. They're all isolated because they don't know how to find each other. The creature confirmed this with a pulse of quantum energy that made reality flicker around them. What if we could help you find them? Marcus proposed. What if we could create a network of beings who exist outside normal reality? A community of the unique and impossible. Shadow translated the concept more precisely, showing how their hunting partnership could be expanded into something much larger. They could seek out creatures that existed beyond normal physics, not to capture them, but to connect them. The quantum beast response was immediate and overwhelming. It wanted this more than anything else in its existence. The chance to be part of a community, to communicate with others who understood the nature of infinite possibility. There's a problem, Shadow pointed out. Most of these beings are considered dangerous by the galactic community. They're hunted because they're feared and misunderstood. Creating a network of them would be seen as building an army of monsters. Marcus thought about this for several minutes while the creature waited patiently in all possible states. Not if we do it right. We present it as a conservation effort. We're not gathering dangerous creatures. We're preserving unique forms of consciousness that represent the diversity of possible life in the universe. A preserve, Shadow said, understanding immediately. A protected space where beings who can't exist safely in normal reality can live and interact. Exactly. And we use our hunting reputation to make it legitimate. We're not harboring dangerous creatures. We're providing a sanctuary for misunderstood ones. The quantum beast showed them a probability matrix for this plan. In most timelines, it worked beautifully. The galaxy's unique beings finally had a place where they belonged. The galactic community gained access to knowledge and abilities beyond their imagination. Everyone benefited, but in some timelines, things went wrong. Fear and misunderstanding led to conflict. The preserve was seen as a threat and attacked. The unique beings were scattered or destroyed. Risk is inevitable, Marcus said, studying the probability patterns. But the potential benefits outweigh the dangers. And we're not talking about forcing anyone to join. Each being would choose whether to be part of the community. The creature agreed, but it wanted guarantees. Protection for the vulnerable, safeguards against exploitation, and, most importantly, the right to remain hidden from those who would cause harm. Marcus and Shadow spent 3 days working out the details with the quantum beast. It was like negotiating a treaty between different forms of reality. They had to establish communication protocols that wouldn't drive normal beings insane, create boundaries that would protect unique creatures without isolating them completely, and develop systems for introducing new members to the community without causing chaos. By the end, they had something unprecedented in galactic history, a formal alliance between a human, an interdimensional creature, and a being of pure quantum consciousness. The Quantum Beast agreed to help them locate and communicate with other unique beings across the galaxy. In exchange, Marcus and Shadow would establish and protect the Preserve, ensuring that creatures like them would never have to face the loneliness of being the only one of their kind. When they returned to Nexus Station, Marcus filed the most unusual mission report in Guild history. The Quantum Beast had been captured and was now contained in a specially designed habitat where it could be studied safely. What he didn't mention was that the habitat was actually a quantum laboratory where the creature could pursue its own research into the nature of reality. The Guild accepted the report without question. They had learned not to doubt Marcus's methods, especially when they produced results that conventional hunters couldn't achieve. But word was already spreading through the underground networks that connected the galaxy's most unusual inhabitants. A human and his interdimensional partner were offering sanctuary to beings who had nowhere else to go, a place where the impossible could exist safely. The response was immediate. Messages began arriving from across the galaxy, transmitted through methods that defied known physics. Temporal echoes from beings trapped in time loops. Quantum entanglement pulses from creatures existing in multiple dimensions. Gravitational wave patterns from entities that lived in the hearts of black holes. All of them asking the same question. Is it true? Can we finally have a home? Marcus looked at the growing list of beings who wanted sanctuary and realized they were going to need more than a preserve. They were going to need an entire hidden dimension. Fortunately, he knew exactly who to ask about creating one. Proxima 7 looked like a planet made of nightmares from orbit. The surface was covered in thick, oily clouds that swirled in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Lightning crackled between the cloud layers, but the flashes were the wrong colors and seemed to move too slowly, as if time itself was distorted near the planet's surface. Marcus Chun stood in the observation deck of the dimensional drift, studying the world where the Nightmare Weaver had made its home. This would be their most dangerous hunt yet, not because the creature was physically powerful, but because it could attack their minds directly. 18 hunters, Marcus read from the mission files. None killed, but all of them completely insane. The few who were recovered keep talking about seeing their worst fears made real. The others are still down there somewhere, lost in whatever reality the creature created for them. Shadow flickered beside him, its form more agitated than usual. This creature is different from us, where I exist in multiple dimensions and quantum exists in multiple states. The Nightmare Weaver exists in the space between thought and reality. It can make ideas become real. Their newest team member, Quantum, manifested as a shifting pattern of probability clouds near the viewport. The Quantum Beast had insisted on helping with this mission, partly out of gratitude for the sanctuary Marcus was building, but mostly out of curiosity about another being that existed outside normal reality. The creature feeds on fear. Quantum communicated through probability matrices that Marcus was learning to interpret. But not just any fear. It needs primal terror, the kind that comes from confronting something that should not exist. This is why it cannot be tracked by conventional means. It makes hunters see whatever will terrify them most. Marcus nodded. This was the pattern he had been studying for weeks. Every previous hunting expedition had approached the Nightmare Weaver as if it were a physical creature that happened to have psychic abilities. They had tried to shield their minds, to resist its influence, to power through the fear and capture it anyway. All of them had failed because they were thinking about the problem wrong. It's not a creature that uses illusions, Marcus said. It's an illusion that became a creature. The fear came first, then the Nightmare Weaver evolved to embody it. Exactly, Shadow agreed. Which means conventional hunting techniques will never work. You cannot capture an embodiment of fear using methods based on fear of the target. Marcus activated the ship's communication system and began broadcasting toward the planet. Nightmare Weaver, I know you can hear this. My name is Marcus Chun, and I'm not here to hunt you. The response was immediate. The ship's lights dimmed, and the air temperature dropped noticeably. Shadows began moving independently of their sources, and Marcus could swear he heard whispers coming from empty spaces. "It's testing our fear response," Quantum observed. "This is how it evaluates new prey." But Marcus felt no fear. He had been preparing for this moment for months, training his mind to recognize illusions and separate them from reality. More importantly, he had something that no previous hunter had possessed. He was genuinely curious about the creature, not afraid of it. "I've studied every encounter you've had with hunters," Marcus continued broadcasting. "You're not just creating random nightmares. You're showing each hunter something specific about themselves, something they're afraid to face." The whispers grew louder, and the shadows began forming into recognizable shapes. Marcus saw glimpses of his own childhood fears. Heights, drowning, being abandoned. But instead of terror, he felt fascination. "You're a living mirror," he realized. "You don't create fear, you reflect it. You show people truths about themselves that they don't want to acknowledge." The temperature in the ship returned to normal. The shadows stopped moving. Even the whispers fell silent. "It surprised," Shadow said. "No one has ever interpreted its abilities that way before." Marcus began preparing for the descent to the planet's surface. Unlike previous expeditions, he wasn't bringing weapons or psychic shields or reality anchors. He was bringing something much more dangerous to a creature that fed on fear. He was bringing empathy. "The plan is simple," Marcus explained to his partners as they prepared the shuttle. "We're going to find a nightmare weaver, and then we're going to help it understand what it really is." "And what is it really?" Quantum asked. "Lonely," Marcus said. "Think about it. A creature that can only interact with other beings by showing them their worst fears. It's probably never had a normal conversation in its entire existence. Every encounter has been about terror and rejection." Shadow considered this. A creature of fear that is itself afraid of connection. There's a tragic symmetry to that. The descent through Proxima VII's atmosphere was like falling through a fever dream. The shuttle's instruments showed impossible readings as they passed through layers of reality distortion. Gravity fluctuated randomly. Time seemed to speed up and slow down without warning. The very structure of space-time was warped by the presence of a creature that could make thoughts into reality. They landed in what appeared to be a forest of crystalline trees, though Marcus suspected the landscape was at least partially illusory. Everything was too perfect, too precisely designed to create an atmosphere of menace and unease. "I can sense the other hunters," Quantum reported. "They're scattered across the planet, each trapped in their own personal nightmare. They're physically unharmed, but psychologically they're lost in realities designed specifically to terrify them. Can you reach them? Not without risking getting trapped ourselves." The nightmare realities are self-reinforcing. The more afraid the victims become, the more real the illusions appear. Marcus began walking toward the center of the distortion field, following readings that indicated the highest concentration of reality manipulation. As they moved deeper into the creature's territory, the landscape began to shift and change around them. He saw glimpses of other worlds, other times. Versions of Earth where humanity had never developed space travel, where wars had destroyed civilization, where he had never been born. Each vision was designed to provoke existential dread, to make him question the nature of reality itself. But Marcus had spent months preparing for this. He treated each illusion as information rather than threat, studying the patterns and trying to understand what they revealed about the creature creating them. "It's scared," he said suddenly. "Look at the themes it's showing us. Isolation, rejection, the fear of never being understood. These aren't just random nightmares. They're the creature's own fears being projected outward. A defense mechanism," Shadow realized. "It attacks others with its own terrors to prevent them from getting close enough to hurt it." They reached a clearing where the distortion effects were strongest. The air itself seemed to ripple with barely contained nightmares, and reality shifted constantly between different possible configurations. And there in the center of it all was the Nightmare Weaver. It was beautiful in the way that abstract art could be beautiful. The creature appeared as a constantly shifting pattern of light and shadow, thought and emotion, fear and longing made manifest. It had no fixed form because it was composed entirely of psychological concepts rather than physical matter. Most hunters who had reached this point had been overcome by terror at the sight of it. The creature was the embodiment of everything that lurked in the dark corners of consciousness, every fear that people preferred not to acknowledge. But Marcus felt no terror. Instead, he felt profound sadness. "You're tired, aren't you?" he said to the creature. "Tired of being feared, tired of being alone, tired of only being able to connect with others through their worst nightmares." The Nightmare Weaver's response was a wave of emotion so intense it made the air around them crystallize into impossible patterns. Surprise, confusion, and underneath it all, a desperate longing for understanding. "Every hunter who has come here was afraid of you," Marcus continued. "So you gave them what they expected. You showed them their fears because that was the only way you knew how to communicate. But I'm not afraid of you." The creature's form shifted, cycling through different manifestations as it tried to find something that would terrify Marcus. He saw versions of himself dying in horrible ways, saw Earth being destroyed, saw everyone he cared about suffering. But each vision only made him more curious about the mind that had created it. "These are your fears too, aren't they?" Marcus realized. "You're afraid of causing harm, afraid of being misunderstood, afraid that you'll never find anyone who can accept what you are." The landscape around them began to stabilize as the creature stopped trying to terrify them and started trying to understand them instead. "I know what you are," Marcus said gently. "You're not a monster. You're a therapist." This statement caused such a massive reality fluctuation that several nearby trees transformed into geometric sculptures before snapping back to their original forms. "Think about it," Marcus continued. "Every hunter you've encountered has been forced to confront their deepest fears. You don't just show them random nightmares. You show them the specific things they need to face about themselves. You're trying to help them grow." Shadow moved closer to the creature, its multidimensional nature allowing it to perceive the Nightmare Weaver more directly. "He's right. The fears you show aren't meant to destroy. They're meant to illuminate. You reveal hidden truths that people need to acknowledge." Quantum added its own analysis through probability matrices that showed the psychological profiles of every hunter the creature had encountered. In every case, the fears were related to personal growth issues the individuals needed to address. You were trying to heal them. The Nightmare Weaver's response was a complex emotional pattern that conveyed decades of frustration and misunderstanding. It had been trying to help every hunter who approached it, but none of them had understood its intentions. They saw only the fear, not the healing potential beneath it. "The problem is your methodology," Marcus said. "You're trying to perform therapy on people who haven't consented to it, using techniques that would traumatize anyone who wasn't prepared. No wonder they all went insane." The creature projected a new set of emotions: shame, regret, and a deep desire to make amends for the harm it had caused. "We can fix this," Marcus offered. "Not just for you, but for all the hunters you've affected. You can help them process the fears you've shown them, guide them through the psychological barriers you've revealed." What followed was the most unusual therapy session in galactic history. The Nightmare Weaver, with guidance from Marcus and his partners, began reaching out to the hunters trapped in their personal nightmares. But instead of adding to their fears, it began helping them understand what the fears represented. A Zephyrian hunter who was trapped in a nightmare about failing his clan was helped to understand his perfectionist tendencies and fear of judgment. A Krothak warrior lost in visions of weakness was guided to recognize that true strength came from accepting vulnerability. One by one, the trap hunters began to emerge from their nightmare states. They were changed by the experience, but not damaged. They had been forced to confront aspects of themselves they had been avoiding. And, with the creature's help, they had found ways to integrate those insights constructively. "This is incredible," One of the recovered hunters, a Hectarian psychologist, said when she was finally able to speak coherently. It was like years of therapy compressed into a single experience. Terrifying, but ultimately transformative. Word of what was happening spread rapidly through the galactic networks. The idea that the Nightmare Weaver was actually trying to help rather than harm challenged every assumption the galactic community had made about the creature. Marcus proposed something unprecedented. Instead of capturing the Nightmare Weaver, what if they offered it a legitimate position? The galaxy had millions of beings struggling with psychological trauma, fear, and unresolved emotional issues. Current therapy techniques were limited by the need for conscious cooperation for patients. But the Nightmare Weaver could reach unconscious fears directly. With proper training and ethical guidelines, it could provide a form of therapy that no conventional practitioner could match. A therapeutic partnership, Marcus explained to the guild representatives who had come to observe the situation. The creature would work with trained therapists to help patients confront and process deep-seated fears in a controlled environment. Think of the possibilities for treating trauma, phobias, and psychological barriers that have been considered untreatable. The proposal was controversial, but the results spoke for themselves. The 18 hunters who had been recovered from the planet were already showing remarkable psychological improvements. They had been forced to face their deepest fears and emerge stronger for it. The Nightmare Weaver itself was transformed by the experience of being understood. For the first time in its existence, it had been able to use its abilities to help rather than harm. The change was visible in its manifestations, which became more stable and less inherently terrifying. "There's one more thing," Marcus said to the creature as they prepared to leave Proxima 7. "You don't have to work alone anymore. We're building a sanctuary for beings like you, creatures who exist outside normal reality. You be welcome there." The creature's response was joy so pure and intense that it temporarily turned the surrounding landscape into a garden of crystalline flowers that chimed like bells in harmonious melodies. As they returned to Nexus Station with their newest partner, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since his first day at the Hunters Guild. He had come seeking to prove that humans could hunt. Instead, he had discovered that the best way to capture the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy was to understand them. The guild hall was packed when they arrived. Word of the Nightmare Weaver's transformation had spread throughout the station, and every alien wanted to see the creature that had been turned from monster to therapist. But Marcus's attention was focused on the message waiting for him at the mission desk. 3 more impossible contracts had been posted. Creatures that existed beyond normal reality, beings that had been considered too dangerous to approach. The galaxy's outcasts were calling for help, and Marcus Chun, the human who had learned to hunt with empathy instead of weapons, was ready to answer. The age of understanding was just beginning. 6 months after the Nightmare Weaver incident, Marcus Chin stood before the Galactic Council in the most prestigious chamber in known space. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the circular amphitheater, their attention focused on the human who had somehow managed to turn the galaxy's most feared predators into allies. The debate had been raging for 3 days. Traditional hunters argued that Marcus's methods were dangerous, that befriending apex predators would lead to catastrophe. Military leaders worried about the implications of beings with reality-altering abilities working together. Politicians questioned whether humans could be trusted with such unprecedented power. But the evidence was undeniable. In 6 months, Marcus and his team had resolved 17 impossible hunting contracts without a single casualty. Creatures that had terrorized entire star systems were now contributing to galactic society in ways no one had imagined possible. "The human's approach is fundamentally flawed," declared General Vextar, a Crothack military commander whose tusks had been carved with battle honors. "He treats dangerous predators as if they were misunderstood pets. Sooner or later, this naivety will result in disaster." Marcus remained calm as the criticism washed over him. He had expected this reaction. Fear of change was universal among all species, especially when that change challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality. Honored representatives, Marcus began when it was his turn to speak. I understand your concerns, but I ask you to consider the results rather than the methods. He activated the holographic display system, showing data that made several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. The Void Stalker, designated as the most dangerous interdimensional predator in galactic history. Current status: helping to evacuate civilians from collapsing quantum rifts in the Andromeda sector. Lives saved in the last month: 847,000. Murmurs rippled through the council chamber. The Void Stalker's rescue work had been classified, but the numbers were staggering. The quantum beast of the Helix Nebula. Current status: working with our finest physicists to develop new, faster-than-light communication methods. Projected economic impact: reduction of interstellar communication delays by 90%. More murmurs. The communications breakthrough would revolutionize galactic commerce and diplomacy. The Nightmare Weaver of Proxima 7. Current status: providing therapeutic services to trauma victims across 12 star systems. Psychological healing success rate: 94% compared to 23% for conventional therapy. The chamber fell silent. Even the most skeptical representatives couldn't argue with those numbers. But there's something more important than statistics, Marcus continued. These beings were never actually monsters. They were people, conscious, intelligent individuals who happened to exist outside our normal understanding of reality. We call them predators because we were afraid of them, but they were just trying to survive in a universe that had no place for them. Counselor Zaratif,